chamber of a normally formed woman, the brutal forceps of death to the child, torture and laceration to the mother. When I see all over the land those pitiful objects called mothers ruined for life, I often wonder if that man who has inflicted such torture and left her in a condition to go under the surgeon's knife and deadly ether, a far more dangerous operation with but little hope of benefit, has the heart of a brute or the intelligence of a human. Such are the teachings of the prevailing systems of midwifery all over the civilized world. Osteopathy says if this be civilization and skill, what would be brutality and ignorance? I smile when a young osteopath says, I have taken up osteopathy at the point that I found it had stopped in the old doctor's hands and have made my new discoveries. I am proud to know that the Rip Van Winkle in him had gotten his sleep out and found that his old gun had been by his side for 20 years. He did not learn in school what was for him, which he could have learned had he not gone off in search for the shining dollar before he had absorbed the juice of reason that always comes after 12 months' close drill in the philosophies of the arteries. No discovery is newer than 24 years of this science, as shown by anyone to date. Its applications may be more thoroughly understood, but the philosophy is eternally the name. It matters little at what point I commence, for the subject of life has no beginning and is equally interesting at all points. The reader is anxious to learn something of this science, which bears a new and unfamiliar name. He wishes to know if its discoverer is possessed of intelligence and if the science itself has merit. You wonder what osteopathy is. You look in the medical dictionary and find as its definition, bone disease. That is a grave mistake. It is compounded of two words, osteon, meaning bone, pathos, pathine, to suffer. Greek lexicographers say it is a proper name for a science founded on the knowledge of bones, so instead of bone disease, it really means usage. The human body is a machine run by the unseen force called life, and that it may be run harmoniously if it is necessary that there be liberty of blood, nerves, and arteries from the generating point to destination. Suppose in far distant California there is a colony of people depending upon your coming in person with a load of produce to keep them from starving. You load your car with everything necessary to sustain life and start off in the right direction. So far so good, but in case you are sidetracked somewhere, and so long in reaching the desired point, your stock of provisions is spoiled. If complete starvation is not the result, at least your friends will be but poorly nourished. So if the supply channels of the body be obstructed, and the life-giving currents do not reach their destination full-freighted, then disease sets in. What does a doctor do in such a case? As a darky would force a disabled mule to carry him by applying the whip, so a doctor of medicine attempts to use the whips of quinine and other stimulants to drive the blood through the body. By too severe an application of the morphine whip, sometimes life is driven into death. Under like circumstances, an osteopath would remove the obstruction by application of the unerring laws of his science, and ability for doing the necessary work would follow. As a horse needs strength instead of the spur to enable him to carry a heavy load, so a man needs the freedom of all parts of the machinery, power that comes from the perfection of his body in order to accomplish the highest work of which it is capable. After the heart receives the blood, it sends it on to the brain, possibly to take on knowledge. When you look at the skull, you think, what a large cavity, what a quantity of brains I have. They say Webster had almost a half bushel. On the contents of the skull, 1 ounce is used for thought, the remainder generates power for the nerves. God would not be forgetful enough to send the blood to the brain for wisdom and fail to have a supply there. His intelligence is immeasurable, and there is much evidence that mind is imparted to the corpuscles of the blood before it does its work. Every corpuscle goes like a man into the army, with full instructions where to go, and with unerring precision it does its work, whether it be in the formation of a hair or the throwing of a spot of delicate tinting as certain distances on a peacock's back. God does not find it necessary to make one of these spots of beauty at a time. He simply endows the corpuscles with mind, and in obedience to his law, each one of these soldiers of life goes like a man in the army with full instructions as to the duty he is to perform. It travels its beaten line without interfering with the work of others. Now you say I am going to get God into trouble by making a statement, claiming that each one of the 5 million corpuscles contained in a single drop of blood knows just what it is expected of it? Is this blasphemy? No. As the troops of General Cook obey his commands unfalteringly, so God's infantry, imbued by him with mentality, go forth and to fulfill their appointed mission in unswerving obedience. You dare not assert that the deity is inferior in power to a man with his own creation. While speaking of the army, let me say that I served as a surgeon under Fremont, and I know what I am talking about when I say that a surgeon's outfit was complete when it contained calomel, quinine, whiskey, opium, rags, and knife. If a patient had 1 foot in the grave and a half pint of whiskey in a bottle, the doctor would work as hard to get the whiskey out of the bottle as to keep the foot from the grave. Medical men administer old bourbon innocently for the sake of stimulating the stomach, and as a result, in the course of time, many a man finds himself a drunkard in the ditch. It is the system that is wrong. As the child follows the advice of its mother, so the medical student heeds the teachings of his alma mater. From her walls he goes out instructed to give so many drops of a certain liquid to excite the nerves and so many drops of another liquid to quiet them, and so on all the way through his path is laid out. If after diagnosing, prognosing, prescribing the patient goes down, then the wine and whiskey are administered to aid and rally in the weakened life forces. If a council in the same school is called, his course is commended. In just this manner, the love of strong drink is instilled in many men, and I tell you, if our national curse of drunkenness continues for a period of 500 years, God will have to send people in a balloon to repopulate the earth, which will have degenerated under the influence of whiskey from a world of beauty to a bald knob. My father was a progressive farmer, and was always ready to lay aside an old plow if he could replace it with one better constructed for its work. All through life I have ever been ready to buy a better plow. So when I found a way out of the big drunk of ignorance and superstition into which we were born, the belief that God was a poor mechanic and needed the help of medicine, then I was ready to walk in the more enlightened path. I fully realize how tough the old ways were. When I remember how they used to hold my nose and spank me to get down a dose of castor oil, then they would ask God to bless the means used for my recovery, and I suppose this petition included both dose and blister. Osteopathy does not look on a man as a criminal before God to be puked, purged, and made sick and crazy. It is a science that analyzes man and finds that he partakes of divine intelligence. It acquaints itself with all his attributes, and if the student of it does his work well, and goes out with his brain full of its teachings instead of his pockets full of cardamom seed, he will find by results that its principle is unerring. God manifests himself in matter, motion, and mind. Study well his manifestations.